And I think sometimes what's helpful is to look at what destroys motivation in people. So what I'd like to do is talk for just a little bit about how to kill motivation. I mean, maybe you've got some people that are just too motivated, too enthusiastic, too eager to get the job done. Let me give you 5 ways that you can kill the motivation of almost any adult. Number 1 is have little personal contact. Have little personal contact. For example, if you call a meeting, be the last one to show up at the meeting and make sure that as soon as the meeting's over, you leave so you don't interact with anyone. You just come in, do the meeting, and leave. Never stop by to see somebody while they're working. See them only when you absolutely have to. And that's sure to dampen people's enthusiasm because most people like contact. They like to connect. So number 1, have little personal contact. Number 2, get people in a passive mood and keep them there. You know, let me use an example out of a meeting. Let's say that you're doing some sort of staff meeting, or it might be a sales meeting. Well, my suggestion would be that you use a lot of lecture, don't use any interaction, and if it's an all-day meeting, after lunch, start off with a film, preferably black and white, about an hour long, at least 20 years old, and make it clear that if there's any props or any equipment shown in the film, it's obvious to everybody that this is obsolete. Okay, so get people in a passive mood and keep them there. Why? Because most people really prefer to be involved. So if you don't allow that, you'll kill their motivation. Number 3 is assume that people can apply what they're taught. Don't bother with examples. I mean, these are adults, so if you want them to do something, just tell them what to do and don't bother to explain it. Certainly don't show them how to do it. Just tell them what to do and then skip the examples. I mean, you can run much shorter meetings. If you skip the illustrations, you can cut your meeting times by 80%. Of course, nobody will be able to apply anything because most of us like examples. I mean, somebody might say something to us, and what we really get excited about is, give me an example. And then somebody gives that example, and it turns the light bulb on for us. So skip the examples. Number 4, be quick to criticize. Be quick to criticize. And remember this management principle. Criticism should be delivered in public, praise, if any, given in private. Okay, criticism should be given in public, praise, if any, given in private. Matter of fact, I think back to a time about, probably 10 years ago or so. I was at a meeting and I thought, well, here's a great opportunity for me to be a participant. And so the speaker arrived. And as a matter of fact, he illustrated probably every one of the principles we've talked about so far, because this meeting had a reception from 5 to 6 and a dinner from 6 to 7. And then at 7 o'clock, the speaker showed up. I mean, he was not there for the reception. He was not there for the dinner. And he started his presentation by saying, I don't really know what I'm doing here. But I was told that I had something useful to say, so here goes. And actually, I could have been better prepared for this. But I thought that this was next Tuesday, and it wasn't until this morning I realized I was supposed to be here tonight. Now, of course, you'd be eager to go to a management meeting with that kind of focus, wouldn't you? And so he said, but here goes. With that, he picked up a piece of chalk and proceeded to lecture. And he lectured for 55 minutes. And at the end of 55 minutes, he said, do you believe that if you change attitudes, you change behavior, or that if you change behavior, you change attitudes? I got to remember, this is a group that's had an hour reception, an hour's worth of dinner, 55 minutes of lecture. Half of us couldn't even remember the question by the time he completed it. And he got absolutely no response. So I raised my hand. And he looked at me and said, you want to try? And I said, well, I believe that if you change attitudes, you always influence behavior. And if you change behavior, you sometimes influence attitudes. Now, by that point in my career, I had academic training that said that it was true. I also had 10 years experience in industry that told me it was true. And you have to remember, I'm sitting with about 30 people that I didn't know very well. had just met a couple of hours earlier. And this person looked at me and said, "Do you still believe that? All the literature points out," and I always wonder when somebody says that, all what literature? I mean, I do a little reading, and you know, I think I have fairly good self-esteem, but I didn't feel too good. And then finally, he went on, and about 15 minutes later, he went up to a flip chart, and he said, "You know, we were doing some research for an insurance company, and they found that sales of new agents would go up for about 18 months, but then they would drop and level off, and they wanted to find out what is it that's happening at 18 months that's causing those sales to drop." And what do you think we found when we did the research? And he got absolutely no response. So I raised my hand. And he said, "You want to try again?" And I said, "Well, they ran out of relatives." Now, I admit that when you're thinking about insurance, that maybe that's a stereotypical response, that insurance salespeople start with friends and relatives. But, you know, at least it got the ball rolling. Now he could have said, "You know, that's a really good guess, but we found that they ran out of relatives right at about 6 months. But, you know, that's a really good guess. Does anybody else have a guess?" He could have said that. He didn't. He looked at me and said, "That's wrong. Does anybody else want to try?" No one else wanted to try. Now, he went on for about another 35 minutes, which, by the way, put him 20 minutes over his appointed ending time. And then he was finished. Now, when I point to this table, I'd like you to go like this. And when I point to this table, I'd like you to go like this. And when I point to this table, I'd like you to go like this. Okay, so get ready. That is about the round of applause that he got. Now, the interesting thing is he then went up to the head of this group and said, "You know, I really was reluctant to do this, but obviously it was well received. I'd like to come back." And then he was the first one to leave. And then, frankly, 35 of the 40 of us at this meeting went across the street to a little coffee shop, and that's where the real learning took place. Did you see when he did that? Did you hear when he said that? I mean, think about the 5 ways we've talked about to kill motivation. Have little personal contact. He was the last one there, the first one to leave. Get people in a passive mood and keep them there. He asked 2 questions in almost 2 hours. Assume they'll apply the information, skip the example. He had only 1 example in 2 hours. Be alert to criticize. I thought he did a marvelous job of that. And then the 5th way to squelch motivation he also illustrated, and that's make people feel stupid for asking questions. And he certainly succeeded in that. Now, I think that probably each of us in our experience has had a manager or supervisor who probably exhibited at least some of those things. Now, the question is very easy. I mean, we could say to ourselves, well, okay, all I'll do is I'll stop doing those things. Or I'll do the opposite. You know, I'll have contact. I'll have involvement with my people. But I think beyond that, we need to be proactive because sometimes different people need different kinds of things.